Bună ziua și bine v-am găsit aici pe startup.ro, unde astăzi vom discuta despre un subiect absolut fascinant, și anume modul în care platformele de criptomonede pot să-și protejeze utilizatorii, tipuri de investigații care se fac și cum se colaborează practic cu autoritățile. Și pentru asta voi trece în limba engleză. I'm gonna switch to English right now, and I'm gonna greet Jarek Jakubcek, Head of Intelligence and Investigations at Binance. Jarek, nice to meet you.
Hello, hi Vlad, nice talking to you.
As I mentioned before in Romanian, we're going to talk about the way you at Binance work together with authorities, with law enforcement in this space of crypto. But just to start the conversation, you personally worked in the Irish police, then in Europol before. Tell me more about this road from law enforcement to Binance.
Okay, sure. Yeah, thanks for the nice intro question, Vlad. Yeah, indeed, as you can probably hear from my accent, I'm definitely not from Ireland, and despite that, I actually started working for Irish police some 14 years ago. I was a bit lucky in this regard because Irish police is a bit more open than other police forces, so you can become Irish policeman even without having Irish citizenship. So that was a great opportunity that opened before me, and yeah, after 5 years working in Irish police, I became more and more involved in cybercrime investigations, and I became more and more involved in cryptocurrency areas. And as you can imagine, there were not so many opportunities to go very deep in cryptocurrencies back in 2014 in Ireland. So I knew that in order to kind of follow my passion, I would need to make a move internationally. And yeah, there are not too many options for police officers. You can go to Europol, you can go to Interpol. I was very lucky that in 2013, both Interpol and Europol were opening their cybercrime centers. So Europol was a bit faster. I ended up going to Europol, and since 2014, I became the first full-time person at Europol looking at this topic, covering cryptocurrencies and crypto investigations. So since 2014, I supported a lot of major investigations in cryptocurrencies, a lot of ransomware activities, a lot of dark web activities, a lot of all the other abuses of cryptocurrencies. And then after another 7 years, which I spent at Europol, I during those 7 years, I got a couple of offers, of course, from the private sector. As it goes, that's kind of inevitable. Once you are either financial investigator or a computer crime investigator, or if you combine these together, if you are a cryptocurrency investigator, then of course you will get offers from private sector. So after a couple of offers, I reflected to Binance offer, and Binance really made something really attractive. They made a interesting proposition to me and my colleagues from both Europol and US agencies, and they offered us the possibility to create investigations team within Binance. So we were able to start the investigation team within Binance, which has grown to about 30 people at the moment. So at the moment we have about 30 people who were originally working for law enforcement agencies, mainly in Europe and US, which is of course uncomparable with any other exchange that is out there. So we have the quite a small army of people looking at criminal transactions, and we are of course using our skills and contacts with our former colleagues, and we are cooperating very closely with the agencies around the world.
You mentioned to me that you started investigating crypto crime, the crypto space, basically almost in 2014, when it was a new space. And just to have a context, how difficult was to investigate the cyberspace, the frauds, when crypto appeared, because it changed this environment?
Yeah, indeed. And of course, in the beginning, it was a bit more difficult to find information about cryptocurrencies. Of course, at that point, there were no colorful animated videos on YouTube that would explain you in nice and easy way what crypto is, how does it work. Of course, at that point, everybody who were in crypto were enthusiasts, were the people who actually read the white paper, who played with the transactions. So indeed, at that point, many people actually incorrectly assumed that cryptocurrencies are completely anonymous, that the funds can be transferred from one person to another without anyone having any idea about the flow of funds. Of course, nowadays, a majority of people are aware that this is not the truth. Nowadays, it's not only the investigators and some more of a sophisticated criminals. Now it basically has become almost a public knowledge that cryptocurrency is transparent and can be followed and can be investigated. And indeed, back in 2013-14, there were no real commercial tracing tools available. So basically, the law enforcement had access to exactly the same tools that the general public had. So we only had access to blockchain explorers like blockchain.info. Then later in 2014, Wallet Explorer appeared, giving us some partial attribution. But it wasn't until later in 2015 when law enforcement actually had the opportunity to start working with commercial tracing tools. It took some time to companies to realize that there is a real commercial potential in interpreting the blockchain and in clarifying what is really happening. So yeah, it took some good 5 years for the private sector to catch up and to start creating monitoring tools that could be used by law enforcement or even by the companies active in the crypto industry, like payment processors or exchanges.
Coming now to Binance, you work together with law enforcement around Europe, around the world, as you mentioned. What are the areas that you are working on basically with the law enforcement?
I see. No, as I mentioned, there is a very intense and close cooperation between law enforcement agencies and Binance, and literally every type of crime you can think of that takes place with the fiat currency is also happening with the cryptocurrencies. So yeah, this is the same way you can pay for, let's say, small scams or even more serious type of criminal activity, including kidnapping. The same way how you can leave a box full of cash at the side of the road. This is the same way that cryptocurrencies could be used as the payment channel as well. Now, to be absolutely honest, vast majority of the crimes that we keep supporting these days are related to different fraud and investment schemes. And it hasn't always been that way, because in my inceptions, we have mainly seen the typical crypto crimes, such as the growth of ransomware, growth of dark market activities. But as the time passed, we could see that the relative share of these crimes has been going down, and as the cryptocurrencies are being increasingly adopted by the society, we can see more and more fraudulent offenses basically replacing the early crypto crimes that we have seen for cryptocurrencies. So nowadays, I would indeed say that most of the time we spend in the investigations are looking at different investment schemes. People are falling for different type of fraudulent activities, and unfortunately, there seems to be a never-ending supply of victims who are naive enough, who do not do the research and jump straight into into making an investment based on recommendation on a third party, which is never a good idea. it is never a good idea with fiat currencies, and of course, it is a very bad idea with cryptocurrencies as well.
So you're basically talking about these schemes where let's call them so-called influencers are pushing different types of coins, and the public invests in them.
Yeah, exactly. It could be something like that. Could be influencers pushing some pump and dump schemes. That's one big area. But there are also other areas. There are loads of different investment platforms. They try to use different narratives. Like sometimes the narratives are crypto specific, like investment into cryptocurrencies, cloud mining, arbitrage trading bots. But sometimes it's not even crypto related. They can be pushing some investment into machine learning or artificial intelligence. So they are using any narrative that sounds plausible to naive investors who don't understand about the real technologies. And yeah, unfortunately, what we see quite often is that frequently the victims are contacted kind of out of the blue. So they are getting spammed, they are getting cold calls from scammers call centers. Sometimes they are approached on a dating website where an often attractive woman from Southeast Asia would be first befriending you and then gradually talking you into investment. So yeah, there are a couple of ways how criminals basically come in touch with people, and of course they are pushing the platforms where you can invest, the platforms where you can see how your investment portfolio is nicely growing in size, and then after a couple of weeks, when the victim wants to actually pull some of the money out, then the victim realizes that it is only one way. You can put the money in, but withdrawals doesn't seem to work.
How important was for Binance, because this crypto space is in general, it's a complicated one because it's still young. We saw a lot of companies coming and going. How important was from Binance perspective to have this area where you work on to investigate, to work with law enforcement, to gain credibility in front of the customers, in front of the investors?
No, of course we can talk about different areas here, because one thing is the security at the exchange, where the customers have never really lost the funds because of different network attacks. So this is something that basically can be proven by the time. We can see that, of course, Binance and some of the other large exchanges have basically stood the test of time, unlike many platforms that disappeared after a few months or a few years. The other, of course, security that you may get is a transparency of the exchange. So, for example, Binance is leading the industry efforts in being transparent, in showing, hey, this is what our cold hot wallets look like. You can check the content. You can see that we have such and such amount of assets allocated to Bitcoin, Ethereum, and many other cryptocurrencies. And this is really a level of transparency that we have not really seen a couple of years ago. If there has been any positive development that we have seen, for example, after the FTX debacle, after the FTX crash, I can say that the positive benefit is that the transparency of many of the large exchanges have significantly increased. Nowadays, you can say how many billions in different assets each exchange has. You can see whether there is a healthy distributions between Bitcoins and Ethereum and, for example, more risky crypto assets. And this is something that, for example, would have really warned, for example, the investors from the FTX platform, because I don't know if you remember, a couple of days before FTX went bust, there has been a balance sheet published publicly online, and all of a sudden people could see that the exchange actually has not really kept any bitcoins, and it has a very little amount of Ethereum. On the other hand, it was very heavily invested in some obscure altcoins. So of course, all the exchanges promise that they are not touching customer funds. And that was not a real possibility with FTX, because otherwise they would be keeping large stash of Bitcoin and Ethers and all the other major coins. So immediately when I saw the the distribution of the assets, immediately I knew that if this is true, then yeah, it's a question of time till something terrible happens there. So really, now the people have the possibility of looking at the composition of the assets at the exchanges, which is unprecedented. You really don't have that kind of visibility in many other industries. And then, of course, there is another level of security we can discuss about. Some exchanges are more compliant than the others. No ambiguity about that. Those who are active users on Binance, they know that nowadays, for example, you cannot really trade cryptocurrency, or you cannot really use the platform without being fully KYC verified. And of course, if you are working with exchange that plays by the rules, that verifies the clients, that has the transaction monitoring, that has the registrations around the world, the chances are much lower that there will be a regulatory action against the exchange. So of course, this is another factor. And then yet another factor is that exchanges also work with law enforcement to different extent. Some of the exchanges are simply uncooperative. Some of the exchanges work with the law enforcement just when they are really pushed very hard. Some of the exchanges are more proactive because they believe that by working closely with the law enforcement, they will also get rid of malicious players by getting rid of criminals on the platform, which will help their reputation. So this is, of course, one of the ways that Binance is also going.
So for the users who still imagine that going into crypto is a full anonymous thing, that's one myth busted, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And as you say, we don't have to spend much time on that, because I believe your audience is already very familiar with the traceability that crypto provides, indeed.
Yeah. Going back to this collaboration with law enforcement and coming to Romania, you announced a collaboration with the Romanian authorities for regulatory purposes and also investigations. How does this work, and what kind of work Binance are doing together with authorities in Europe in order to help the authorities to regulate the space better?
Yeah, thank you. So indeed, we do work closely with law enforcement authorities, and this is not just limited to operational cooperation, like, hey, we need the data, hey, yes, here you have it. So of course, we are responding to legitimate law enforcement requests. We are providing useful information, and we are providing it fast. And this is not just coming from me. If you happen to talk to law enforcement authorities in Romania, I'm pretty sure that you will hear the same thing about Binance. Now, when it comes to different training and workshop activities, last year we have delivered more than 70 of these, around 70 workshops and trainings around the world. This year it's going to be even higher number, and I can tell you quite frankly that this year I've been basically in different country every week, speaking to different law enforcement authorities. And when it comes to directly to relations in law enforcement agencies in Romania, we have close cooperation with both the police, especially the cybercrime unit. We have already had a very fruitful cooperation with DCOT. We also are in close communication with Asset Recovery Office. And I have to say that the authorities in Romania, they are actually very well versed in cryptocurrency investigations. There is definitely no need to come to Romania with some general presentation about cryptocurrencies. The investigators are already at the level where we can immediately start discussing specific case studies and the practical assistance that we can provide them.
This is what I wanted to ask you, not only in Romania, but in general in Europe, about the level of training of the law enforcement in investigating crypto crimes. You were in law enforcement, but every country is different in the end.
Yeah, indeed. You are right. Every country is different. Also, every country has a different level of resources. In each country, the law enforcement agencies have different amount of resources they can spend on investigation. And I will put it quite bluntly. Cryptocurrency investigation takes resources. You have to have somebody who speaks English because all the educational materials are in English. You have to have someone who is technically savvy, who is ideally crypto enthusiast, because if you don't really like the technology, if you don't use the technology yourself, it will be too abstract. Like you have to be a crypto user yourself in order to be a good in cryptocurrency investigator. And then you of course also have to have access to tracing tools that are relatively expensive. We are talking about access to the tools that cost either thousands of dollars per year or dozens of thousands of dollars per year. So of course, not each and every law enforcement agency in Europe can afford this. And this is also, for example, the reason why some of the countries, let's say the Netherlands, are, let's say, a bit ahead of majority of the other countries in Europe. But at the same time, I can tell you that when it comes to the skills of Romanian investigators, generally the skills are on the high level. I believe that based on my experience from Europol, Romanians are one of the best English speakers in Europe, which really helps with crypto education. And the number of cases that Romanian police has supported internationally was very high. And also, back when I was still in the cybercrime center at Europol, I was the only person there from Czech or Slovak Republic, and once I left, there was no one there to replace me. At the same time, we had at least 10 colleagues from Romania. So you have a very good presence in the international law enforcement agencies.
Because you mentioned about the education and the skills that people should have in order to investigate crypto crimes, what kind of profile would you need as law enforcement? Because it's something between a cyber investigation, a classic policeman who is working on the technology and internet side, but you have to know the financial part of it. So what are the skills needed?
Indeed. And what always helps is natural curiosity, ability to kind of ask the questions and trying to solve the puzzles, and be very persistent about it, because at the end, the success rate correlates very strongly with the effort that you are able to put in. And if I have, for example, aspiring crypto investigator who has never sent a crypto transaction, who has never used a mixer, who has never played with privacy coin, who hasn't opened account with many different exchanges, I would not see that person as a strong candidate for my team, because I want somebody who will not play with the technology when it will be his job. I want somebody who is naturally interested in the technology, and he already has significant experience before he actually applies for the position. So ideally, I would be looking for somebody who is already a financial investigator or a crypto investigator for some time, who has operational successes, because too many people are just kind of dedicating their time responding to emails, and the operational success part is missing there. You have to have somebody who takes the initiative and is able to push the investigation from start to finish. And also you must not be afraid to talk to people, because usually when you are the investigator, part of the data is readily available on the blockchain. Part of the data is stored by the private companies. You must not be afraid to reach out, to constantly bug people for access to the information that will ultimately assist in your investigation. And so yeah, it is a combination of having the knowledge, having the skills, having the pedigree, plus having some characteristics. And of course, by hiring somebody who already works for law enforcement, we know that the person not only comes with the knowledge, for example, of how to investigate, also knowledge, they know what is realistic when it comes to pushing the case forward. They also have contacts. And contacts are also important for us as an exchange. So for example, if we discover a suspicious individual at the platform, for example, who is receiving significant amounts from child abuse entities, then we also want to be able to do proactive work with this individual. So by having people who have strong contacts within their agencies, we can push the case to people who are likely to do something about it, so that we can make sure that the case does not end up on the pile, but the case actually gets the attention it deserves.
Going to the regulatory part of the crypto space, the European Union is working on MiCA, and what do you think there's needed in this regulatory space, and how it will help you as part of Binance and law enforcement in order to investigate, but also the space as in general?
Yes. No, there is like Binance has been calling sometimes for unification of the legislation, because as you know, operating a global exchange in many countries where you have conflicting sets of the national legislation becomes almost an impossible task. So definitely for large exchanges, having a clear regulatory framework which is recognized by many countries in a large regional bloc, this is definitely a situation that is getting better. So from that point of view, we welcome the efforts to standardize the legislation across the board. Then, of course, we need to take a look at the individual aspects what the legislation will bring. And despite many opinions that are already too positive or too negative at this point, I have to say that we simply have to wait to see how the legislation will be actually implemented and how it will be enforced. I definitely like some of the parts. There are definitely some of the parts that are beneficial. For example, the passporting rule. Instead of the exchange having to register in every single country, having to register and get the license in one country and then having it passported to the other member states, that is certainly something that sounds very beneficial. That sounds very practical. On the other hand, MiCA will also bring a lot of obligations, some of which, for example, include the travel rule, which means that all of a sudden it will not be enough for the exchanges to identify who are their clients. They will also have to identify who are the people who are interacting with the clients. And as you well know, crypto is not really built to provide this kind of functionality, to provide this type of reporting. And as of this day, we know what the requirements will look like, plus minus, but we are still not sure about the actual implementation. There are kind of still several possibilities out there, so we will have to see how it will practically look like. But if it turns out to be, for example, too cumbersome for users to, for example, verify their own unhosted wallets, I can imagine that the users will flock from the exchanges that are over-regulated and too cumbersome to use for users to exchanges that are completely disregarding any rules whatsoever. So we have to be very careful to kind of maintain balance here.
And because we're reaching the end of the conversation, we talked about what changed when cryptocurrencies appeared in investigating crimes in this space. And we saw that crypto is used in money laundering operations and so on. In your perspective, is it easier today to do money laundering through crypto than it was before having this technology, or it's now the same basically?
Yeah, that is a good question, and it's also a bit philosophical one. So we could go on this one for a long time. So I will try to come up with some short explanation. So yeah, basically, crypto is very practical technology. Crypto is a very practical technology, and as such, it will be used. It is not going to disappear. It will be used for legitimate purposes. It will be used for criminal purposes, and being as convenient to use as practical, it is practically guaranteed to be abused by criminals. But what is really great is that on one hand, it is convenient to use for criminals. On the other hand, it is also relatively convenient to investigate by the law enforcement. Because when it comes to, for example, investigations in the traditional sector, the money moving from one account to another, going through financial institutions in different countries, it would take you ages to get responses from many different countries and to trace the flow of money. Whereas in the blockchain, if you have the tools that you need, you can have some big picture of where the money goes within minutes, and then you can reach out to the exchanges on usually through online channels, sending requests to the portals, and many of the exchanges are actually voluntarily responding to police inquiries. So the cryptocurrency is making it very interesting because for the investigators it is both an opportunity and the threat. Of course, the threat is that more and more people are using cryptocurrencies, and of course, there is the number of as the adoption grows, the number of criminal transactions grows as well. So there is kind of this possibility of being swamped by the offenses. But on the other hand, majority of the investigations are traceable, and many of the suspects are detected through the use of cryptocurrencies. And that was also my experience from Europol. For example, we could see that the traditional investigation techniques, for example, using the IP addresses, the use of the benefit of those investigations gradually decreased over time with use of privacy enhancing and anonymizing technologies. The same can be said about WHOIS, the domains register going dark. The open source information sometimes are being less relevant these days because people know about anti-forensics, they know about the data they leak. So something that was actually on the increase and was helping to detect many cases were cryptocurrencies. And really, when it comes to traditional cyber offenses, let's say ransomware, dark web, cryptocurrencies and following the money actually was behind majority of the detections that the law enforcement has made. So it is definitely a huge opportunity for the law enforcement.
Jarek, thank you very much for joining us and for all the details.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vlad.
Thank you. I'm gonna switch back to Romanian doar ca să vă mulțumesc că ne-ați urmărit sau ne-ați ascultat. Puteți să rămâneți cu noi alături pe startup.ro. O zi bună!